That's
Yep.
fine.
Cool. So in 3, 2, 1, we're live.
Good morning. Welcome everybody to this discussion on manufacturing Britain's recovery. First, a little bit of housekeeping. You can see us, but we can't see you. So if you want to ask questions, then you'll have to use the Zoom Q&A facility. And please put who you are on the question, as it will help. My name is David Miller. I'm your chair for today. I'm the managing director of Heap & Partners. We are a medium-sized 150-year-old engineering business. We manufacture valves for most of the major industries. Having been founded in 1866 might mean we're old, but please don't assume we're old-fashioned. The last 12 months alone, we've invested in cloud-based systems, 3D printers, QR codes, augmented reality, a 5-axis machining center, and our first robot, all to try to give ourselves an advantage in the world. But who cares? Does any of it matter? After all, surely manufacturing in Britain isn't important anymore. It's a fraction of what we used to be. We can't possibly compete with the Chinese. Well, obviously, I disagree. Britain has the 5th largest economy in the world. To put that into context, it's twice the size of Russia. And that is partly thanks to the fact that we're the 8th biggest manufacturer in the world, which leaves about 185 countries behind us and very keen to get past us. Outside of the City of London, manufacturing is the highest paid sector, and we support numerous other industries. And of course, it's much easier to help your balance of payments by exporting goods rather than services. And best of all, and I think this is very important, the work manufacturing provides is interesting. But not everything in the garden is rosy. Between April and June this year, the UK economy suffered its biggest slump on record as coronavirus lockdown measures pushed the country into an official recession. The world view on distribution changed. We now realize that long distance supply chains can be interrupted and they're not necessarily great for the environment. Even our own government has discovered that controlling quality from afar can be an issue. You can't always get what you order from China or Turkey. Modern manufacturing techniques, whether you call it digitization, the 4th industrial revolution, or Industry 4.0, favor flexible local production, and automation allows us to compete with any country, regardless of their cheap labor force. British standards for health and safety and quality are some of the highest in the world. This is why Chinese mothers have been buying British powdered baby milk, because they know it's safe. People from other countries, such as France and Germany, naturally favour locally produced products. That's less common in Britain. The British public need to catch up and start buying British, or at the very least, start asking where things come from and who made them. With Brexit, we can for the first time favour UK companies for government contracts. Perhaps we should be setting a minimum standard for the amount of local content in every government purchase. So we have plenty to discuss with our panel today, who I'm very pleased to introduce. We have Mark Pawsey MP, co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Manufacturing Group, David Wafen, chair of the Institute of Directors, Liverpool, Paula Basnett, CEO, Wirral Chamber of Commerce, and Andrew Borland from the Virtual Engineering Centre, University of Liverpool. Sadly, Barry Sherman MP was going to be joining us, but he's had to be dragged off before a select committee. Sadly, he would be without him. As I said at the beginning, I would encourage you to ask questions via the Q&A facility, and we will try to pose them to the panel as we go along. If we could start, first of all, with a general question to all the panelists, if you could take it in turn. What do you feel are the main challenges currently facing British manufacturing? Can I suggest we start with you, Andrew?
Yeah, I think you've summed it up very well. The challenges of manufacturing are to stay ahead of the curve. The UK has traditionally been behind on productivity and effectiveness, but we've got this opportunity to take the digital technologies that are emerging now and are maturing and apply them in a setting where you can improve customization, quality, efficiency, effectiveness, and outputs. And there's really a quantum leap to be taken. In the UK, tech has traditionally been seen as something in the digital sector, but the real kind of magnitude of gains is in manufacturing. Manufacturing is an industry that's difficult to uproot and move out. So if you invest in digital in manufacturing, you know you've got an asset that's staying in the UK. It provides jobs across many different fronts. It's capital intensive, so it's a good anchor or a good place to put investment, and it's somewhere we have scope to improve on the international stage for, and particularly with what's happening this year. The drive to exports, the idea of British manufacturing with digital services as a quality brand that can be exported is where we're going, and digital is the centre to that. So the challenge is really to sort of bring everything together to reach that point.
Okay, thank you. Paula, could you take the next?
Thanks, David. For us at the Chamber, most of our focus has been on the small and medium businesses rather than the global operations. So through some of the world leading manufacturers, and we have Unilever and Bristol Myers Squibb here, I think the mantra from the large manufacturers is the future of manufacturing is green and it is digital. So how do we get our smaller businesses to embrace those two key challenges? So for us here on Wirral, it's how do we support those SMEs to be more efficient, to be more competitive, and I think as the two drivers out of that is finance. So what we're hearing in Wirral from our small businesses is funding. Funding is absolutely critical to them, critical for them to be more competitive, to be digital, to implement the robotics. And then lastly, for us, David, what we're hearing in Wirral is all about the skills shortage. And that's why for us, Brexit, dare I say it is going to be a challenge, because a lot of our employees in the engineering, certainly the engineering manufacturers, have been our EU employees. So for us, the message that we're getting from our small and medium enterprises is skills and funding key in order to drive and to be competitive once we come out of the recovery stage.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's an interesting point on the green side of things. One of the concepts that we had to get our head around was that going down a green route and becoming carbon neutral was less about hugging trees, and it's more about the bottom line. And that's one of the messages we'll have to get across to smaller companies, that they understand it will help their profitability, not just the trees. Mm-hmm. David, would you like to step up next?
Yes, thank you, David. I think there's obviously some really big challenges and exceptional employers in the, not just in the Liverpool City region, but across the UK. However, there simply aren't enough of them, and that comes down to, obviously, Paula mentioned skills. Andrew, obviously from a university background, we need a radical rethink of how we prioritise what is important in this UK, and that needs to be away from just focusing on service-related industries, from professional services to manufacturing. The recent pandemic has really focused that massively to show where we actually are missing out on the manufacturing capability. And only this morning, some of you may have seen the headlines about the testing and tracing, and that because of the supply chain issues, that might cause another real bottleneck, which has the potential to have a massive impact on all of our lives, but also the economy as a whole. So, there needs to be some real radical thinking to see what we can actually change for the future.
Okay, thank you, David. That's an excellent point. I think the skills are something we'll probably come back to later. Mark, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to take part in your webinar today. I speak as co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Manufacturing, but also as a West Midlands MP, and my constituency is Rugby, which is immediately adjacent to Coventry, which is the historic home of the motor industry, which saw a big decline in manufacturing in the 70s and 80s, but recent resurgence, which needs to be maintained. So I'm very keen to ensure that we maintain our manufacturing base. you asked about the challenges facing manufacturing. The challenges are pretty much those faced by all businesses, which right now business people are just looking at survival, which is how do they get effectively over this current period of great uncertainty, and then look at the broader challenges. And you pose the question, David, who cares? Well, I think a lot of people care. There are more people here in Parliament who care than you perhaps think care. And for those of us who support manufacturing, I think our case has, in the recent months, become a stronger case. And there are two reasons for that. And that is about the ability to for our economy to bounce back after the pandemic. We know that it's always been important to have a balance in economic activity, but we know that economies with a larger service sector, such as the UK, aren't able to rebound back as fast as those with larger manufacturing sectors. The decline in GDP, according to the IMF this year, for Japan will be just 5.8%, but for the UK, with a bigger service sector, will be 10.2%. So, and we know that those economies with loads of services, city centres, where people are able to carry out their functions from home, are not going to recover as effectively. So that's a good reason for ensuring we stimulate manufacturing. And the second is, and David, you alluded to it, was that we saw huge amounts of offshoring took place in 70s, 80s, 90s, early noughties, especially to low-wage economies. I would argue that was made able to happen because of highly efficient logistics industries able to get products and components in from overseas. But we know that that became an immediate problem when COVID struck, and we realised that we'd got no domestic supply of PPE. Now, there's a company in my constituency that manufacture insulation material for the motor industry. They're called Automotive Insulations. They grew very fast after their relationship with Jaguar Land Rover and saw their market fall away in March and April. So they converted their material to face masks so that we've got some domestic supply. And I think we've learned the lesson that cheapest isn't always the best. And that leads me on to another all-party parliamentary group that I'm involved in, which is I'm chair of the all-party parliamentary group for professional sales. And what we need to do, and what manufacturing does, is get out and sell our products. There are developing and growing markets, and we've forgotten this, the skill of salesmanship, in the same way as we don't pay enough credit to engineers. We don't recognise good salespeople, and I'd like to see the best salespeople the country's got out in world markets. And I just want to touch on another area of interest to me, which is the BEI Select Committee and the work we've done on manufacturing. And a year ago, we conducted a report on automation and the future of work. And I think in your questions, you draw attention to the very low uptake of automation here in the UK compared to other markets, compared to Japan, for example. And on the Select Committee, we visited Japan and we watched robots building robots. We are a long way away from that. And a big supplier of robotics in the UK, bringing in Japanese products as it happens, but with a fairly large West Midland manufactured content, tells me that businesses don't get automation. And there are two particular problems. One is that most manufacturers think that an automated solution to a problem is much more expensive than it actually is. It's a lot cheaper than they think. And the second is they don't realise how automation can be repurposed. They tend to think that you buy a machine, it's available for one function. If the market for that product falls away, what are they going to do with this highly specialised automated equipment? Much of that can be repurposed. And I think that those who are marketing digital solutions, again, need to be more effective in their sales. So there is plenty going on, but plenty of support for manufacturing here in Westminster, and perhaps more than you might think.
Thank you, Mark. That's excellent. I think your point is very valid, that we need a balanced economy, a balance between the service sector and the manufacturing sector, just like you need a balanced diet. It's the only healthy way to go. I've got a couple of questions coming in. There's a question from Colin Finley, who's the managing director of Seven Group. He's interested in local content, and he's saying that he works on projects overseas where the countries insist on a certain amount of local content and local jobs before the British company can land the order. And he's asking, does the panel believe we can introduce such measures for the UK project opportunities and enhance the use of UK manufactured product? Does somebody want to take that up? Then I will pick one of you. David, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, from my understanding of the question, he's alluding to the point that we'll now have freedom to be able to choose our suppliers, whereas obviously in an EU environment, that certainly hasn't always been the case, although lots of other countries, in fairness, seem to ignore those rules. And when they were looking at suppliers for their trains or for the infrastructure, they would often seem to give priority to local suppliers. That is one of the great opportunities of Brexit, in that we need to look at home first. And if we don't look at home first, yes, people still need to be the best that they can possibly be in terms of delivering particular projects, and whether they be SMEs or whether they be large infrastructure projects. We've got an awful lot of expertise on our doorstep that we probably don't fully utilize at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. I completely agree. Certainly you see it in countries like Saudi Arabia, who are desperate to diversify their economy away from just being an oil and gas market. So it's certainly common. Paula, would you like to take?
Yes, David, I totally agree with both of you. And just on a local level, when we look at contracts, obviously in the city region, a lot of our businesses do want to have local suppliers. They want to work with the local suppliers and support the local suppliers. And I know with a lot of the construction contracts, where they will have an agreement where they have to take on so many local staff and also the local supply chain. The issue for us has always been, as a chamber and as an area, is who enforces that, who monitors it, and do companies actually do that? So for us, it's all well and good having these agreements, but who monitors it, and does it really? Do we really give the opportunities to our local labour force and our local suppliers? So they're the questions I'd pose, rather than answering, David. I think it poses more questions than answers.
There's also, I guess, a risk management point of view. Is that nearshoring of the supply chain and the clustering and having the transparency and the integrity and knowing people, that de-risks the whole transaction. So it should be an almost a passive thing. It's a point of pride when you're putting a tender in or a bid in to say, look, this is the team we've put together, and you may know them, you may not know them, but there's the reputation and so the UK contacts and the genuine clustering, the natural organic clustering of manufacturing.
I think that's an excellent point by both of you. Actually, Andrew, as you're talking, a question for you. As it stands, there are just 71 industrial robots per 10,000 workers in the UK, and that positions us behind 14 other European countries and makes us the only G7 country with a robot density below the world average of 73. Does it matter? Yes,
and it's changing. So robotics, there's the sort of the fear that it's always jobs is the first thing that's brought up, but studies have shown that the robotics and automation, and we've got to be mindful, we're not just talking about robots, we're talking about automation across the industry, across supply chains and across business processes, from initially quoting from work to doing designs, to getting stuff out and doing QA and assembly and then follow up and servicing. So automation is not just the robots. Automation is all the back office functions, and it fuels the economy. It drives efficiency. We've got studies that show that whilst there will be some displacement in jobs, robotics, I think Deloitte reckon, and will produce 3.5 million jobs in the UK. Robotics creates jobs. In the automation with robotics improves collaboration, and again, going to the automation point, we've all seen over the last 7-8 months, we've been collaborating in a different way. Teams, Zooms, sharing folders through SharePoint, all that kind of thing as the baby steps towards automation, and it changes the way we collaborate. It increases productivity. The machines can work longer, they can work harder, they can work in more hazardous environments, and they augment the workforce. There was a study in the States that showed that the 57% of businesses that were taking on robots were not doing it to change the dynamics of the workforce, but to grow the business. They were there to augment the workforce and to improve performance and productivity, as well as make the business more agile. So this is the automation, the robotics piece. It allows you to do that mass customization. Sort of going back to Mark's point, is the automation and the machines are not just for one thing. They can be retasked for multiple things and allow you to change over faster and allow you to realize new economies, products that previously would be uneconomical to actually sort of jig up and produce a small batch. With robotics and also with additive manufacturing, that unlocks new areas and new segments that you can go into. They improve the customer experience from the quality control point of view. Is you get a better finished product, you can have new dimensions of customization, and you're more responsive. So automation is important. We've traditionally not necessarily been at the head of the curve. We have the advantage of maybe coming to this a little bit later in that the technologies are more mature. I think the UK landscape is a little bit more fragmented. We don't sort of have the German sort of Mittelstand kind of model in the UK. We have a lot of much smaller businesses. So they may be slower to adopt, but when they do, they're agile enough to be able to run with something once they see the value proposition. So I think we'll see a snowball effect now as we're digitizing. UK industry will catch up because we're seeing that there's so many advantages to the automation piece.
Thank you, Andrew. I would say that the question mark over the jobs and versus robots is one that always comes up. In our own business, when we told the staff we were introducing robotics, the first thing we did was guaranteed no job losses. And then having done that, we told them the really dull jobs that the robots were going to be doing, and everyone was pretty happy. They're quite looking forward to working with their new co-workers. So,
it keeps people in the workforce longer, possibly, people who physically wouldn't be able to do the job and maybe would be looking to retire. You can engage more people in the workforce. You can keep people productive for longer. There was a study in Harvard Business Review that showed that there was a bigger threat to a business from lack of orders and lack of sales growth than to job creation than was from automation. So actually automation is there helping you grow the business, which is securing jobs. So that's I think that's just a bit of a fallacy on the front, on the jobs front, the fear of automation taking jobs. Yeah.
Oh, I agree. Question for Paula and David. Some 91% of UK manufacturers have reported a dip in output due to coronavirus pandemic. SMEs are particularly vulnerable. What do small and medium-sized manufacturers need the government to do so that they can survive and hopefully prosper in the future? Paula, do you want to go first?
Yes, thanks, David. For me, it's about reinforcing what I said earlier on. So investment into capital, and they've got to have the right terms. It's not just about accessing that investment, it's making it worthwhile for that small business to be able to invest, whether it's automation, digitization, being more sustainable. They have to have the right terms for that funding, because they are, I don't want to say risk averse, but they are very conservative when it comes to funding. That's what we're finding. If they're going to invest in a piece of equipment, a piece of machinery, then they need to know they're going to obviously get a return on that investment. And that's quite difficult sometimes for those small businesses. And then secondly, as I said earlier, skills, apprenticeships. We need, I feel from government, a 2-3 year apprenticeship programme for our manufacturers. And also, how do we look at retaining those staff as well? How do we keep the skill set here, not just in Wirral, not just in the city region, but in the UK? How do we keep the skills and harness those skills of our manufacturers?
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, great points, Paula. I think that for me, if you look at it, not just for an engineering and manufacturing point of view, but the common themes for lots of businesses that they're looking to be more efficient, more productive, and ultimately more profitable. How government can help that happen is really by taking, what I describe as a radical approach, that when we're in a current climate where often government will look at funding infrastructure projects, what they could do is they could fund the innovation to speed up the development of these of the robots, so that it'd help to enable companies who were SMEs, which are the heartbeat of the economy, to be able to access these quicker, to then, when they've accessed them quicker, help to drive down the cost so it becomes more commonplace. And then when it becomes more commonplace, you can actually start to make real progress, economically, so that we don't end up in a situation ever in the future, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's looking at the comparisons that Andrew touched upon earlier, say, for example, between ourselves and Germany. And Mark made some very good points around the fact that there's lots of data out there that shows the countries that manufacture and have that at the heart of what they do recover faster and more sustainable as economy. And also we've got to radically rethink in terms of what our priorities are around the skills agenda. Because if I give you one example, and in my day job running a recruitment business, is that I deal a lot in the legal sector. In the last 2 years, there's been 25,000 law graduates each year. However, there are only 5,700 training contracts. So 3 out of 4 end up in a job whereby they've spent an awful lot on a degree that is considered to be very powerful and will add value to themselves and their career. When in actual fact, if we tilted that balance and had some of those people go into engineering, to look at manufacturing careers, and made them sexier, for the want of a better phrase, then we could really help to drive our economy forward, because we run the risk being too service-led, that we're always at the behest of others rather than just ourselves.
David, there are some themes coming together here, aren't there, which are that the countries that have got the highest levels of investment in automation have got the highest levels of productivity. The problem with the British economy for years has been productivity and getting productivity levels up. And I don't know whether you've seen the Make UK report that came out a couple of days ago. It said that 44% of manufacturers have no policy to adopt industrial digital technology because of the skills shortage. So we're going round in circles here. So we need to deal with the skills thing. I think government has recognised that, and I don't know whether people heard the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, a virtual speech in the same way as we're virtual today, but he spoke about a lifetime skills guarantee, so that people would get funding for a training in IT or engineering in the same way as people would if they were claiming a degree, and that every adult would be offered 4 years of funded post-18 education. So we've got to upskill, and if we upskill, then manufacturers will be more inclined to take on the new technology, which will increase productivity. It's all coming together. We know what needs to happen. We just need to drive it.
Absolutely. No, I think that's correct. Certainly, we've had problems with skill shortages. It took us 9 months to find a decent design engineer. We had no problem interviewing design engineers, but actually one that could read a drawing and do some basic CAD work was the real problem. So I think skills is a serious issue. That said, our best staff are the apprentices, and we've long been a fan of the apprenticeship schemes. We've usually have 1 or 2 through the factory all the time. We're not personally a fan of the new model that the government is trying to push on the apprenticeships. It seems complicated, and I feel that it probably should be simplified. I don't know if that's something you agree with, Mark.
I think so, and there has been a renewed emphasis on apprenticeships in the time I've been an MP. So I came in 2010, and I know David spoke about the number of law graduates and number of law posts. The example I was always given was photography, which that we were generating loads of photography graduates, but there were few jobs. So we have spent too long really saying to young people that your aspiration needs to be to go to university and get a degree, and that's not the right route for everybody. And we have, the government has had an apprenticeship champion. It was Rob Halfon for a period of time, who's now the chairman of the Education Select Committee. It was Nadeem Sahawi for a while. I don't think we've got one right now, and maybe we need to get that back running again, because we do need to encourage people to look at a route other than academic. And the other bit I've just mentioned is about changing people's perceptions of manufacturing. I was told an account of a school trip where the kids were on the bus and the teacher showed a big factory out of the window and said, look guys, unless you work hard, that's where you're going to end up. And we need to change that attitude. We need to get people, and in my constituency, we've got the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which is one of the government's catapults, which is pushing industrial digital technologies. But one of the key roles they've got is to get school kids in there. And many parents' perception of a factory is a dark and dingy place with swarf all over the floor. It's, you know, not a pleasant working environment. And modern manufacturing is miles away from that. I've been into modern manufacturers where, frankly, you could eat your lunch off the floor. It's that clean, it's that smart. It has to be that clean and that hygienic. And what we haven't been able to do is to get across the message to parents and teachers what modern manufacturing is like, because those are the people who will influence our young people in their career choices. So we just need to engage more with young people. And I hope that at Heap & Partners, you get loads of school kids around your factory showing them what modern manufacturing could be like.
Mark, we do. I was going to actually ask of the whole panel about how we educate the educators, because we work with the schools, we have school parties, we have work experience. We bring the kids around as much as we can, obviously not currently, but we'll get back to that next year. But the number of times that teachers have said to me, manufacturing, I didn't know we made anything in the UK anymore. And I was over in America a few years ago talking to them about how they work with the schools, and they mentioned about work experience. And I said, oh, we do that. We have about 12 work experience a year, and the kids seem to love the hands-on, the making part. And they looked at me like I was mad. And they said, no, we don't do it for the children. We do it for the teachers. Now, maybe that's something that should be built into the system. I mean, I don't know what the panel thinks.
I think, David, one of the issues is around how the system is funded. And so for schools, it's in their interest for kids to stay on in sixth form, which generally is for, you know, purely academic subjects in many cases. It's then in the university's interests to get them to go, you know, onto a whole load of courses. Each course, you know, they can only facilitate, you know, I'm sure Andrew has a cohort of X number a year, whereas, you know, to do that in engineering obviously requires the facilities. To do it in media studies, psychology, so on, it's a very different setup. So we've also got to change the infrastructure that's in place to enable these things to happen, and change the funding model so that my sister for many years was the deputy head of a school, and I'd say to her, you know, often we'd talk about, you know, funding challenges, and then I'd drive home from work and see on the back of a bus all these secondary schools advertising for the sixth form. And I said, well, maybe if you stop spending money on advertising for sixth form, you know, you'd have some more funding. And she explained to me that the pupil premium per head for sixth form students was more than it was for, you know, years 7 to 11. So they were fighting over the revenue, hence why they were advertising for it. And when you have a system like that, it drives the wrong behaviours, because instead of people going to, you know, an old-fashioned YTF, an apprenticeship, or, you know, what really now is the future will be a degree apprenticeship, so you've got hands-on experience whilst you're getting a qualification. they're the things that we need to be focusing on if you're going to drive people. And for all the reasons that, you know, the panelists have said, and Mark, you know, made some very good points about the circle and cycle that we're in. Well, you know, we've talked about these things for 20 years. We need some radical action rather than, you know, a case of warm words and little follow through.
I'd probably kind of jump in there sort of from a university perspective, the later stage of the process, and even for kids, I think young people are more motivated by issues than ever. And we've got some big challenges in the world with sort of growing population, food security, climate change, all the rest of it. R&D is another big theme in the UK. We know we're behind on R&D spending. We're trying to get to 2.4% from 1.7 and 1.9. But the challenge is all of the R&D, all the science, you need to make that solution, and it's keeping hold of people through the years at school and at university to say, look, if you want to change the world and you want to have these big ideas and new technologies, you're gonna have to make it, and that's where manufacturing comes in. That's why you want to be in manufacturing. If you want to change the world, you want to create new solar panels, electric cars, water purification technology. Do it. Go for the full thing. Go full life cycle. Make the finished product, and that's maybe a message we're missing. Is that we need a little bit more ambition and aggression in that sort of following through. And to pick up Mark's point earlier, the sales bit is the export bit. Is we need to sell manufacturing as the delivery vehicle for the solution to most of our kind of global challenges, the grand challenges in the world. That, you know, manufacturing is going to be the bit where you actually deliver, from drug development to sort of, you know, new technologies, fighting aging, all that kind of thing.
But Andrew, we've often been good at the big ideas. So, you know, lots of ideas were generated in the UK, but they weren't. We didn't take advantage of them commercially. We allowed the IP to drift away and for other people to take advantage of those ideas. The catapult centres are intended to try and bridge that gap. Academics sometimes refer, I think, to the valley of death, which is where we simply failed to capitalise and the technology that we've developed in our universities. And you know, we do need to work on that. And I think, I say, catapults are a step in the right direction, but we're still not good enough for that. There are far too many fantastic ideas that are being developed in universities that we're not seeing through to manufacturing.
The other bit of that, Mark, is I've been doing some research recently with the management school looking at inward investment in R&D. So in Liverpool city region, I think it's something like less than 4% of research income into the universities comes from UK industry. So it's an area of real opportunity for us to kind of bring that to the fore and capture the value in the UK rather than just licensing stuff out of the UK to get products made here.
I have a question from David Osborne, who's the managing director of Roman Showers. So I'm assuming they've been in business quite a long time. They export all over the world, and they have to provide product compliance at port of entry in most countries. We don't ask for that in the UK. And he feels that there is also a degree of disingenuity by people saying designed in Britain when what they mean is made in China. I guess with Brexit coming along, do the panel feel that we need to increase our standards at port of entry and protectionism? Dare I use that phrase? Do you want to take that first, Mark?
I'm not at all keen on protectionism because you know, I'm a believer in open markets, and I want to see frictionless trade. I mean, frankly, for West Midlands motor manufacturers, getting goods through the channel ports and onto line side on a production track without the need for warehousing is incredibly important. And I'm very, very anxious to make certain that we end up with a deal with our European partners. And I'm like many bothered that we're getting close to the deadline and that just needs to happen. So I'm not at all a fan of any impediments at the border, but I do think the point about, you know, the designed in Britain and, you know, maybe sticking a sticker on a product with a Union Jack on it that says that it can be misleading, and maybe there's an opportunity to look at that kind of labelling. But we need open markets, and we also need, you know, for UK component manufacturers to get selling into UK manufacturers. I think for far too long, and we heard that in evidence from the automotive sector when the business select committee was looking at the impact on Brexit on automotive. That too often UK component suppliers have sort of given up and said, oh, you know, the products will come in cheaper from Turkey or from China or from India or from a European manufacturer. I just think we need to raise our game and be a little more ambitious, but I'm in no way a fan of impediments at the border.
I'm not sure that he was necessarily talking about impediments. I used the word protectionism, but standards would possibly be a less controversial word. A question from John Pierce. He's talking about material regeneration, which I think we used to call recycling. And he's asking about trying to engage with companies. He's saying, can we engage with the companies like Veolia and Suez into the world of manufacturing to increase the circularity of resources? So in other words, tying the recycling companies in with the manufacturing companies. Andrew, do you want to take that first from the university's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that circular economy thing is a piece that's being worked on in a big way in universities and in the research field. The opportunity is for me, for smaller manufacturers, is to just have that transparency of making it easier for materials to be kept in the supply chain, and potentially there's a piece there for kind of government intervention to create an economy where it makes it worthwhile to capture the sort of the waste and reuse it. I think that's something we'll see more of in future, and it fits well with the manufacturing agenda and with the environmental agenda. And digital tools, as you'd expect from me, the answer would always be the digital tools are the best way to facilitate that, along with a little bit of kind of market economics.
David, can I come in on that? I spent my working career in the food service packaging industry, and so I'm probably the only person in Parliament with anything positive to say about single-use plastics. But that's an industry that takes recycling incredibly seriously, and government is giving the sector a nudge. You will know that there's going to be a tax on virgin material, and that products will be required to have 30% recycled. This is in plastics. So, one of the challenges, however, for manufacturing is getting hold of recyclate of a sufficient quality, because one of the things that we do with that in our recycling system is we commingle, and so a large proportion of the plastic that's recycled has food contamination on it. And it isn't of the same quality as the virgin material, particularly as plastic raw material is a byproduct of oil, and with the oil price as low as it is, it's easier and better for a manufacturer given a choice between virgin material and which is perfect, and recyclate, which may have some residual contaminant in it. He will always opt for the virgin material. What we've got to do is change the price mix between the two, and the government tax is intended to do that. So it's very much an issue the government's working on. But one of the things that we need to do is get to a consistent system of household waste collection, because different local authorities do different things, and a whole chunk is getting missed out of the recycling system.
That's an excellent point. Thank you, Mark. A question from Ian Turner at Imtex Controls. I would suggest it's probably for Paula maybe to start. He's pointing out, following on from our discussion about the Middle East, and saying that you have to commit to local labour content in the assembly of the final product. He's asking, how does the panel feel UK producers should handle such issues? As they're an SME, they find it difficult to compete with either multinational or foreign producers when faced with the challenge of trying to introduce local content in a faraway country. Paula, what do you think an SME can do about that?
And I think that's a good question, David. We're working with some of our SMEs that don't currently export, to help them understand and go through the process. How can they get their product to market to export overseas? Now, it is a very, very complex and I think complicated process, and certainly with us coming out of the EU, never mind just it going over to Asia and the Far East. But even with EU, with all the documentation and the process that we'll have to go through, I can understand a lot of our smaller manufacturing businesses, you know, I suppose for them it is difficult, because what they're trying to do at the moment is get their product just to out there in the UK, never mind exporting. So for us, I'm not answering the question really, David, but what I am trying to say is there is a barrier there for our SMEs to try and export. They do feel it's a risk. They don't feel they have the expertise within their organisation. And mostly they feel that it is a cost to them. So I can't really answer the question you've asked, but I'm trying to help you understand what I'm experiencing with our small and medium enterprises, is that they may want to export, but it's a lengthy process for them and they feel it's too complicated. So how do we get them over that barrier is what I'm saying, really.
Okay, Paul, I think it's a valid point. It's a complicated area. Ourselves, we've found that partnering with another company has helped us. We're only at the beginning of this process, but if it works, our partnership will involve us sharing the risk with another SME and jointly going into Saudi Arabia, opening up a centre over there with a local partner. So we're beginning to tick some of the boxes, but I have to say, even that it is incredibly complicated and slow and difficult. It's not an easy thing to go into, I have to say.
And David, could I ask you whether you've had any support from DTI or BAYS, from government, because you know there are institutions, people in country who should be able to help. I think Paul is dead right. I think, you know, for small businesses, exporting is incredibly scary. How do you know you're going to get paid, for example? What terms of trade going to be? What's the impact of exchange rate fluctuation? So government should be there to support and hold people's hands. And I would say to any business in my constituency, if you're not getting the support you need, shout at your MP and get them to engage with DTI and get some support and some help, because it is very, very complicated and very difficult.
Yeah, Mark, sorry, David, just on that, Mark, DTI have been great with our businesses in Wirral, and we do bring DTI in if we do find that there's a business that will actually take that first step. So I have to say, yes, DTI have been very, very good for our businesses. We
found them very helpful, and they work quite closely with us to try and help. Our problem in the Middle East has been that we're facing Aramco, and that is a behemoth and a half, which moves at a glacial pace. So that's been fun. A question from Richard Ellis. He is a continuing issue is payment from our larger blue chip customers, in other words, the most reliable ones. It appears the bigger the company, the worse payers they are. Legislation for companies over a certain size for payment to SMEs would help cash flow immensely. And that, I have to say, I thoroughly agree with. The bigger the company, the worse the payer. Do you want to take that, David, from the IOD point of view?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there obviously are there are laws in place around, you know, payments and late payments. That, you know, you can charge interest at 12.4% over the you know, Bank of England interest rate, but very few companies are ever keen or willing to use those tools for the fear of souring those relationships. You know, one of the conversations I've had regularly with clients across all sectors is that, you know, a customer isn't a customer unless they actually pay the bill. That all they've done is take advantage of your service if they're not prepared to pay it. So I think that I personally would like some of the regulations reinforced to ensure that you know, companies feel confident and it's the norm to be able to you know, get swift payment. But also, you know, for the larger companies, we need it to be, you know, socially and professionally unacceptable to not pay, you know, suppliers, particularly the SME. we probably have a good opportunity in the current climate to drive that feeling of, you should be embarrassed that you're not paying your suppliers quickly. I remember a few years ago that government announced that they would look to pay, SMEs within a short period of time, that they reduced the window. And it was great, and I think it started off with some progress, but there's definitely been a slip over time, and that it's kind of 60 days and the kind of what is described controversially as sometimes the Tesco mentality of screwing down suppliers to minimal margins and then not paying them forever and a day. We just want fairness and transparency.
Mark, do you fancy introducing a private members bill?
Well, one shouldn't be necessary, David. First of all, on procurement, there are, public sector procurement, people do get paid. I ran a business before becoming an MP, and we did about 40% of our turnover with either national or local government of some form or another. And the great benefit to me, I knew whatever happened, I was going to get paid. It might occasionally take time to get paid, but normally we got paid quickly, and we were guaranteed a payment in a way that wasn't always the case with our private sector customers. And so the government has done two things. One is the prompt payment code. So one of the things that I'd encourage any SME dealing with a large company is, first of all, establish whether they subscribe to the prompt payment code. There are some who sign up to it and don't deliver, but that's a different issue. And the other issue is that the government have introduced a commissioner for small business called the Small Business Commissioner, who's based out of Birmingham, and his job is to look at payment issues. And I very much note David's point, is that if you're a small supplier to a big company and they make up a fair proportion of your turnover, you're perhaps not going to shout up too much and jump up and down to make public the fact that they're not paying on time for fear of losing the business in any way. But so the Small Business Commissioner can take on inquiries on an anonymous basis. So if there are companies out there that are really bothered about the payment practices of big companies, identify whether they're on the prompt payment code. If they've signed up to the prompt payment code, ask them why they're not adhering to it, because they have made a commitment. And if they, either way, I would refer it to the Small Business Commissioner and let him have a look at it.
I've certainly had experience with companies who will remain nameless, who have a 12-step authorization process, and the purchase order payment has to go through every 12 steps, which is actually 12 desks. It has to go from one desk to another desk, and it is guaranteed to mean that instead of paying in, well, they're meant to pay in 30 days, they pay in 60 to 90 days. But if one person is on holiday or off ill, then it could be 120 days or worse. And it is just a process that is unnecessarily bureaucratic. And they've designed it that way, presumably deliberately, to slow down the cash leaving their business. It's something that we see fairly regularly with the large companies.
And I'm sure, David, you allow for that in the margin on the product you're supplying to them.
We do allow for that in the margin, but also we refuse to pay. Don't give them credit terms now. They have to pay up front before they can buy off us.
They've been their own worst enemy then, haven't they, in commercial terms? But certainly look at the trading terms. See, I'd be interested to know whether they've signed the prompt payment code, and I'd also be interested to know what the Small Business Commissioner has to say.
I will be looking at that. It'll be quite interesting. A question for the panel. CBILS, the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loans, they, depending on which bank you were dealing with, were very easy to get or almost impossible. Some of the banks behaved very badly and some were very good. They de-risked these loans for the banks. What could we do to de-risk these investments? It's something that Paula touched on earlier, I think, but for the manufacturer, because obviously, as Andrew said, we have to make these investments, these capital investments. That's good for the country. It anchors the business here, at least to a degree. It's all very well making it easier for the banks, but should we be doing something more for the companies?
David, should I come in there? Just my experience with the businesses, and I did touch on it earlier. It is all well and good having funding available from the banks, but they do have to be favourable terms. And we've had a couple of our businesses where they had an opportunity to supply PPE, and I'm talking about a business that employs about 250 people in Birkenhead. They were diversifying. They did the blister packs. They had the opportunity to manufacture for the city region, not just the UK, but for the city region, PPE equipment. They needed 2 machines in order to do that. Unfortunately, the deal fell through because the terms of finance was just, it made them impossible. Although they knew that if they invested, they could manufacture the PPE, but they weren't willing to take the risk because the risk was just too high with the terms of the finance. So that contract came and it went with that particular business, and we also had another smaller business employing about 50, and again they were going to automation. They hadn't planned on it, but they decided part of their business model would be to introduce automation, and that didn't mean they were equally the staff were going to be made redundant. They weren't. They were just going to upskill those staff. Again, that deal fell through because the finance terms for that particular machinery, it just did not make it viable for the business in the first 12 months to be able to purchase it. So it is an issue. Funding may be available, but what are the terms?
David, one of the things that we found on our Bayes inquiry into automation was that a lot of lending institutions didn't understand automation, and so they would put a high rate of interest on because they didn't understand what was the security on the asset. But in terms of interest rates generally, I mean, interest rates have never been lower, and so therefore the rates that businesses should be able to borrow at should be pretty attractive, and that should make it, if they're with the right institution, should make it attractive to make the kind of investments that we'd all like to see.
I do think that yes, money is cheap at the moment. Definitely, it's never been cheaper, and those of us that remember 15% interest rates will appreciate that. I think that a lot of SMEs need a little bit of hand-holding in terms of the preparation for the going to get the loan, whether it's preparing cash flow forecasts, a business plan. I'm not talking absolutely colossal and never-ending things, but some fairly basic business requirements. And it might be that working with their local chamber or with one of the other bodies, that they can get some support in doing that, so that then when they get in front of the bank, they've got the documents that they need. I think for a larger company, it's relatively straightforward. I mean, I'm very lucky. I've got an FD, and she can whomp up a cash flow forecast for the next 9 months, 18 months, whatever we want. But it's something that sometimes is lacking, and maybe there's a little bit more education for the manufacturers.
David, a point on that. The Bayes Committee also looked at support for SMEs, and one of the things we identified was that people often start up businesses because they've got a good skill or trade, or they know about a product or a market. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be good business people and capable of drawing up things like cash flow forecasts or understanding their balance sheet. And so one of the things we recommended was that business owners and managers spend some time working on their business as well as working in their business, and that's maybe taking out half a day or a day a week in order to upskill themselves in the skills that are involved in running a business. Now, many businesses will say, how on earth am I going to find the time to do that in the present climate? But we do need to upskill in terms of business skills the people that are running our businesses, and that sounds to me a great example. The other issue is I wouldn't fancy trying to do a cash flow forecast on the business I used to run, which supplied products to the hospitality industry right now, because trying to anticipate what our sales level would have been in 6 months' time would have been incredibly difficult. There would be so many variables, and so I do understand the challenges that many small businesses will have in preparing the kind of information that lenders are looking for.
I appreciate that. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to draw this to a close, I'm afraid, as we're coming to the end of the time. I think we've covered some interesting points. I think we're aware of the productivity curve. I think your final point there, Mark, about investing, the manufacturers investing in themselves a little bit, whether that's making time for the things. Certainly we need to sell harder, and that we need to get the message across about automation, that it's not stealing jobs, it's actually making better jobs. And educating the educators, I think, is something that we see quite a lot of agreement from the audience and the panelists on that. So it only remains for me to thank you all for attending this. I appreciate your input. Hopefully our audience has enjoyed this, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.